Welcome to Nerds at Church, a podcast diving deep into nerdery and the Bible. I'm Pastor Kay, and I use pronouns like she and her.
And I'm Pastor Emily, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
And I am Brooke, and my pronouns are she and her.
In this episode, we'll discuss Reformation Day, also known as Halloween, which this and every year falls on October 31st, though you may be commemorating it in your congregation on the 29th, which is the last Sunday in October. Also, a reminder, folks, we just sent out / started requesting responses to our listener survey. As you know, we are approaching the end of our third season, and so looking at making some changes, and would love particularly your feedback as our listeners to hear what you love, what you don't love, what you wish for, what you absolutely don't want us to get rid of, all those sorts of things. So you can go to the link in the episode description, or you can go to bit.ly/NAC listener survey and let us know what you think. It's a pretty short survey.
Check out the episode description for links to the Bible passages and other references we make in this episode.
For our deep dive for Reformation, we are super excited to have special guest Brooke McLean, whose infinite sapphic nature cannot be contained in a single sentence. She is currently a tenured barista and future senator. Welcome, Brooke.
Yay!
Hi guys, how are you?
Good.
Thank
We're
you
so
so
glad to
much
have
for
you.
having me.
We are so glad to have you. And before we get into our deep dive, which we have not told you what it is yet, it's a surprise. Kay has a story why we are doing this particular.
And by story, we mean meme. Because a couple of years ago, in the various clergy Facebook groups, a meme started going around this time of year, and it struck me as both funny and also eerily accurate, because apparently, and we will share this with our various links too, but apparently coffee arrived in Western Europe around the year 1515, and lo and behold, it was the year 1517 that the Reformation kicked off. And so while we cannot prove that Martin Luther's caffeination levels had something to do with his being willing to, pound nails into the front door of the church in Wittenberg, it's possible. And also, being a Lutheran with a coffee addiction, I think it sounds more possible, personally. So we'll be sharing that meme with you, and also it seemed only right that after 2 other episodes on the Reformation that we finally get to this important connection of coffee and the Reformation, and the real reason why Luther was willing to get the Catholic Church so angry at him.
Indeed. And for those of you who want the, other information about the Reformation that is not nearly as important as coffee, we'll link to our other episodes that we've done on the Reformation so that you can get that perspective as well. So, Brooke, where did coffee originate? What's the story behind coffee?
So, I do believe that origins Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. I think that there was a story about a farmer who was out with his goats, and his goats were eating something, and he was kind of unsure about what they were eating, and then he ate them, and he ate the beans, the raw beans. But I think that's where it originated.
I have to say, the process of how coffee got started, I understand that someone had to find the beans and realize they were edible part, but my question is, how do you decide to drink bean water? How is that process? What happens? It's kind of like the thought of, who was the first person to think that we should try drinking cow's milk, except that at least in that case, we knew that baby cows could drink it. So this seems even less likely to me.
It's similar to the, who was the first one to drink fermented beverages? Because that's what we drank before coffee arrived, because that kept the water more potable, drinkable. But yeah, who first came up with bean juice?
There is a hilarious bit from a teenage television show from the 90s called Young Hercules that starred a very young Ryan Gosling, where he is talking to the lady who runs his local tavern, and she's trying to talk him into drinking coffee for the first time. Not that that's, historically accurate or anything. And she goes through the process of describing coffee and how it's made, and it just shows how ridiculous this whole process that we eventually managed to come up with is. I can't imagine how long and how much imagination must have been involved.
It's just we're gonna boil these beans and drink it.
Yes.
and see how it is.
Right? And then
Yeah.
maybe we should roast them. Right? Because it's not just like take the raw beans
Yeah.
and boil them. It's roast them, then chop them up really fine,
Yes.
then boil them.
And then take
Yeah,
the beans out and drink the water.
Absolutely.
Which is the truly bizarre part to me.
Yeah.
Like, I understand wanting to, boil beans. That's fine. But
definitely trial and error, don't you think?
I have to imagine.
So many times.
So much. Indeed.
So, what's fair trade coffee? And should we care if our coffee is fair trade?
Okay. So when we talk about fair trade, we're talking about either free trade or fair trade. Are the two like main ways we talk about it. So if you think about like the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement and a lot of free trade agreements that countries make, that allows for taxes, easier flow of commerce, that sort of thing. Fair trade came about specifically in response to the ways that free trade allows for economic exploitation. So fair trade is we care not only about how much we are paying and like what the best product is, but also how the people are involved in getting that product to us are treated and how they're compensated, right? So it's making sure that farmers are paid a living wage for growing the coffee and harvesting the coffee. And some of this comes out, it like happens in like collectives. So there are a lot of like coffee collectives that have come about in the last several decades, I think. But it's definitely a process. I guess I would also be curious if there are particular places, like if there's like different places that you know of that does coffee and sells and like grows coffee. Or I know I went to El Salvador when I was in seminary, and they had like shade grown coffee and not shade grown coffee, and I was like, this is amazing. I didn't know there was
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just like so many different ways of growing coffee, and the like, okay, does it matter how we pull? Which I think.
So when I was thinking about this question, that's the first thing that popped in my head, because this is kind of in the realm of what I was thinking, is like when you're going to buy some type of gem, or like you're going to buy a ring or something, and you want to make sure that it's like ethically sound. And I really, this past couple months since I've been engaged, I really have learned the importance of this.
Yeah.
So I'm a barista and I do work for a coffee company, of course. And doing my own reading, sometimes coffee is a really touchy subject because it's not good, and sometimes it's not fair. And places around the country that provide the most coffee, they don't get paid for the product they give us. And so that's hard for me. And it's especially with it coming from Ethiopia, I'm sure that they don't get paid for what they're doing as well as they should be. And I'm sure there's children and all of that involved. So yeah.
I think and there are companies that will certify stuff as fair trade, and there's some stuff that can be complicated in like how that gets certified, but in general, like fair trade certified is pretty easy to find if they are, and not easy to find if they're not, because people want to brag about it. They want to brag. They want people to know that they're treating other people fairly.
Yeah, and that they can not only do that, but also they can afford to do so and stay in business because maybe they're good at business.
So within the realm of coffee, there are a lot of different types of coffee and coffee roasts, all of that stuff. Can you tell us about the differences?
Yeah. So I know all the answers to this. So first I'm going to talk about some of the myths, because this is very important. The myths is the number one thing that you should tell people when they are like, oh, tell me about coffee. The number one myth is that our dark roast is not the strongest. We're just going to start right there.
Okay.
So the dark roast is just made and produced for a deeper taste, not for caffeine intake. You would find that lighter roasts, like for instance, I'm just going to throw out one, Veranda Blend, which is a Starbucks light roast. That is one of the newer roasts that this company Starbucks has put out in the market. And it actually, people don't know that the blonde roast has the most caffeine of all of the roasts that you can get. And so, for instance, I am going to also put out there that you should definitely watch your caffeine intake. And I think it's important as a barista for me to say that, because this is not good for your heart and your blood pressure, number one. So back to these milligrams of coffee, because you need to keep an eye on this. So if you go to a place like Starbucks, they have different size coffees. They do size 8 ounce to 24 ounces, or 20 ounces actually, for a venti. So they have 4 sizes. And a short has 180 milligrams of caffeine, 8 ounces of coffee. We don't drink 8 ounces of coffee.
Yeah, I don't
as
know when the last
Americans,
time I just had 8 ounces
Yeah.
was.
I feel that a normal size coffee is like a 16 ounce, which would be a grande in Starbucks terms. And that is 330 milligrams of caffeine. In a venti, it's 415 milligrams. And all of these are just a medium roast. We're not even talking about veranda. This is just medium. And then veranda, so those numbers, if you go up to veranda, it's like 10 milligrams more for each cup.
Wow.
The dark roast has the same as a medium pike at Starbucks for Starbucks drinkers. Yeah.
I was just curious if you know what the most caffeinated coffee there is in the world is. I can't remember, and I don't know if you know.
I don't know that.
I think I've seen a couple different brands fighting over which one had the most caffeine. Whether or not either of them are right is a whole separate question, I feel like.
Right, that's fine. There's a death by coffee or something that's Also, I've heard the Kona blend.
Oh, it is.
Kona coffee.
So I googled it real quick, and it is called Death Wish Coffee, and it looks like it's the highest caffeine you can get. It's made. Yeah, I'm gonna try to do it, but
which also probably means it's not necessarily the best tasting coffee out there, because that's not really what they're going for.
Yeah,
that's true.
There's another one on the market called Biohazard Coffee, and I'm like,
whoa,
oh, that sounds
yeah, that's
kind of crazy.
That.
Oh, also, I do want to say that people that sometimes like to go and get espresso shots and I need a lot of caffeine. Shots only are about 70 to 75 milligrams, so you'll get more caffeine from just if you just grab a cup of coffee.
That super tracks my experience of drinking coffee at home versus getting.
You get much more caffeine from just home drip coffee than you're going and buying a coffee. You're actually could get more of what you need at home than going out to just get about 125 milligrams, which is not even half a cup of coffee.
Sure.
Interesting.
Well, and I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you, but the blonde roast coffees, the lighter coffees, are actually from a different plant than the dark roast coffees. It's that they're a different type of coffee bean. But is one or the other of them roasted more as well? Or is the roasting about the same?
I don't think it's a different bean.
Yeah, I was
really?
Say, I
don't think quote me on that.
Oh, okay.
It's about the roast.
The roasting, yeah, it's definitely about the roasting. Because the dark, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense.
Oh, so those are roasted longer.
Yes, and it's just for taste. It's just to enhance the flavor of the coffee. Because some people, it's a taste thing. It's a mind thing. It's...
Yeah, I know people who say that people who drink blonde roast coffees are just wimps, and I don't go there myself. But
blonde roast is where it's at.
I was going to say, this is a house of blonde roast drinkers.
Absolutely.
Because it has more caffeine.
I tend to go with the medium, but yeah.
And it's a better flavor. Not trying to put out
I used to be a dark roaster.
Blondes. But blonde coffees usually have a toasted malt, chocolate, vibe, which goes along with cream and various flavors that you would put in the coffee. It's a whole vibe.
Sure. So what actually is the difference between decaf and regular coffee? Is one of them healthier for you, or?
So I love this question. So decaf coffee still has caffeine. It's a very small milligram of coffee, but it's still there. So when I was growing up, my grandmother, she loved decaf powdered coffee. She used to drink Senka every single day when I was growing up. And I was really confused because I didn't understand why she drank coffee if it didn't do anything for her. You know what I mean? But like I said before, it's a mind and a body thing. So people that have to stop drinking coffee, who have always been coffee drinkers, it helps them with that situation. I still want the flavor, but it does not have anywhere close to the same amount. In a regular cup of coffee, it's about 15 to 30 milligrams of caffeine. That's like the regulated amount for a decaf.
Okay.
I feel like people definitely think a lot that there's none at all, but it's the minimum amount that you need without disturbing blood flow and your heart and all of that. That's why a lot of older people still drink it.
Yeah. I've known a couple of folks with serious heart conditions where the moment that they knew that it was a health condition they had to worry about was when the doctor said, actually, no, you can't drink even decaf coffee anymore. They were not thrilled.
Because it still has a little bit in there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make coffee decaf? Do you know?
Magic.
This was not a prepared question. I'm sorry. I just thought of it.
I'm imagining like an angel or something pulling the caffeine out of the cup of coffee. And then what happens to the caffeine, though? Can you like separate it and use it in something else?
Is that how caffeine pills are made?
This is exactly what I thought they did, because so at work when we have decaf coffee, we have to be able to tell what is regular and what is decaf and what is blonde by just looking at it. And one thing I noticed about decaf coffee is it doesn't have the sheen that the rest have. It looks dull, like they're like old.
Okay.
But I just looked it up and it said like coffee beans are steamed and rinsed repeatedly with a chemical solvent to flush away the caffeine. So that's why they're not shiny.
Okay.
Because they're chemically treated.
I know. It's chemically treated.
So I guess you don't get to keep the rest of the caffeine. That seems unfair.
No, that's crazy.
No, that seems dangerous. I think probably when I hit the point where I should not be having that much caffeine anymore, I'm just going to switch to tea full time.
We're just going to be drinking tea.
Well, a lot of tea has a lot of caffeine too, though. You do still have to be a little careful. But.
Yeah, but like I can get tea that's not caffeinated without a chemical bath.
Yeah, we don't need that.
Well, okay, sure. I don't know.
My grandma, I'm like, was she doing the right thing? I mean,
I willingly eat hot dogs, so I don't think I really get to complain. But
I love hot dogs. Okay? I feel you.
I've had veggie dogs, so not quite the same, but pretty close.
Yeah, I have to say the idea of still drinking decaf coffee after not being told you can't drink regular coffee anymore, it sounds a lot to me like how my parents went through the process of quitting smoking. And for so long, the trick for them was keeping something in their hands. Like my mom started cross-stitching, and Dad, I think, actually probably doubled his coffee intake because he needed to have the mug in his hand so that he didn't pick up a cigarette.
Yeah.
So
respect.
Yeah.
I think there's like something to be said that we talk about it in our house because there are multiple people in our house who are ADHD. But so frequently it's like caffeine is not healthy. Like there's just this like stigma around coffee and caffeine, and people
and to be fair, caffeine is a mind-altering drug. Like let's not ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
It's a fun one, but
it's a tasty one when you put stuff in it. And also, it is medicinal for a lot of folks, particularly folks with ADHD. Like there is my favorite armchair diagnosis for ADHD that I have heard from people with ADHD is, can you drink coffee and then go to sleep?
Yeah, I don't know that that's a 100% thing, but the vast majority of folks I know with ADHD, that's true.
Yeah, I don't think it's 100%, but like if that is true about you,
you should probably talk to somebody.
Yeah. So when we talk about health, like I think about that like there are good purposes for caffeine and coffee and like good to drink it. I don't know if you have other thoughts on that, Brooke.
Because if you're looking for caffeine and coffee is not what you can do, I think a very good substitution would be a chai. Chai has a good bit of caffeine because it's based with black tea. Mm-hmm. And so there is a lot of like antioxidants as well in there that can help you get through your day. And it's kind of like going hand in hand with a little boost of caffeine, but also having an herbal route. And there's a lot of places where you can get like a chai latte, or you can get just a chai loose bag, you know. Yeah. You can jazz it up with a little bit, you know, if you're trying to keep it light, you know, you can jazz it up with a little bit of non-fat milk, with a little bit of honey, and all know how amazing honey is. So that's a great alternative. And then like just herbal teas just in general, like if you're not a fan of like chai because it's a little spicy, you know, you can get you a little green tea bag or some, like some citrus, get you an orange, peppermint tea bags.
And if you're not a tea person, I suppose you could try eating chocolate for caffeine, although it might take more chocolate, which would be a terrible
Yes,
sacrifice on your
Kay.
part.
Such a sacrifice.
And that is a very healthy choice for caffeine. You would not think, but the antioxidants in chocolate are just as good for your heart.
Especially dark chocolate, which is the best kind of chocolate.
However, since we are talking about food, I think we might also want to throw in a plug for it is always best to be accurate when you're telling people what you're giving them. And so if you're handing someone a cup of regular coffee or if you're handing them a cup of decaf, please don't lie to people. Like, you don't know who has a heart condition.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And just because the coffee at your place of worship, school, wherever, is super watered down does not make it decaf reality. No. It just makes it bad.
Yeah.
Speaking entirely from experience.
You know, Brooke, I have to ask, you said that you can tell the difference looking at coffee, whether it's decaf or regular. Can you tell the difference by taste? I don't think I've ever been able to, and I really like coffee.
Okay, so I can probably taste the difference because I'm a barista.
But, okay, I love that answer. Because I'm a barista.
Just person who no, I'm not going to say a normal person who drinks coffee every day, because I guarantee you that if you handed someone a decaf coffee that drinks coffee every single day, they're going to taste it as decaf. It's not that it tastes different, but you can definitely feel that there's something missing from your bite, from your drink. And
the soul is gone.
Yes. It's crazy because when I was growing up and I used to take sips of my grandma's Senka, like I was talking about, I thought it was delicious. I'm like, this is good. And then I started working at a coffee bar and I was just like, I'm not really sure what that was. Because the bold flavor is not there. Like, it doesn't matter how hard they say the bold flavor is in decaf coffee. It is not true. The only bold decaf coffee I've ever tasted was Maxwell House. This is not a plug, but Maxwell House, y'all gotta figure it out.
That's hilarious. My mom used to drink the powdered cappuccino type coffee growing up. She doesn't anymore. Now both of my parents drink real coffee. But
yeah, my parents never drank the fake coffee stuff. Although Mom was always a big fan of a brand called 8 O'Clock Coffee, which is actually kind of hard to find in stores these days. Huh. It's an older brand, but it was the best bean you were going to find in a grocery store in the 80s. Let's put it that way.
All right. When I was in Slovakia, the two ways of drinking coffee were Nescafe, instant coffee, or to put the grounds in the cup and then pour the hot water on it, and then if you were adding or whatever, and then drink it with the grounds still in it. I couldn't do it because of how it felt on my teeth. But
I've heard of Turkish coffee and how unbelievably strong that stuff is, but that sounds like a whole different level.
Yeah.
No, I think Turkish coffee is stronger because it's more finely ground.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But speaking of, so we're talking about all these different types of coffee. Brooke, what are the different ways of making coffee? How do you make the magic?
Okay, there are a lot of ways to make coffee. I'm going to give you 3 ways. So, the first way would be a pour over, which I enjoy a good pour over. That's about 2 tablespoons of whatever your favorite coffee is. So I would put a little veranda blend in there. And I really like, if you can find a pour over, little filter.
Is that the Chemex things?
Mm-hmm. You just set it right on top of your cup.
It can be. To be honest, I found mine for $2 at the grocery store.
Ooh.
So
okay.
Nice.
It's made out of plastic.
I think we have a plastic one because ADHD.
We have a Starbucks one.
Oh, my bad.
But pour-overs are great for people that prefer the first cup, which everyone knows the first cup of the pot is absolutely delicious and delightful. So, if you...
It's also the strongest.
Is indeed.
Or if you're the only person in your household who drinks coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that would save from waste, having a pot of coffee that's not going to be used.
That's just sad.
It is.
It
very
is.
sad. Pour-overs are very strong, and I always recommend to put your creamer in first if you do a pour-over, because it is going, by the time, unless you're watching it like a hawk, by the time you see that it's at the area where you want to put your cream in, you might already have been pouring water in, and you can't stop it unless you have something ready to move it. But pour overs are great. When I was living by myself, I used to make pour overs all the time, and I enjoy them a lot.
Yeah.
Another way to make coffee is a French press.
Ooh,
French
sounds
press is
French.
absolutely delicious. My best friend, shout out to Kristen Butler, my best friend, her mom used to make French presses. And if you want that like real aroma, you can get more of aroma than a coffee maker with a French press, because literally you are like pressing the water using the mechanism. You're pressing the water through the coffee grounds and like making a really fresh pot. You can find fresh presses anywhere. The grocery store, you can get them on Amazon. But if you just want a really deep, lovely cup of coffee, go with French press.
Just don't use a metal knife to stir the ground.
Oh dear.
Because it will shatter eventually.
Yes,
Not that my mom did that 2 different times.
Oh.
She uses a plastic knife now. So what's the third?
So my third one is just going to be a homemade pot cup of coffee. So I picked this one because I have some tips about home pots for people out there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I feel like it's very important that if you are buying beans, that you make sure that you can get them ground where you're purchasing your coffee. It's very important that you, like, some people buy it and grind the coffee as they go. And sometimes it's not good. It doesn't keep the flavor as well when you like to keep taking some out the bag. But if you are going out and buying some coffee to make it home, make sure you're going and getting it ground by someone who can make it the coarseness that you need. There's lots of grocery stores that provide the service, and if you find like you don't feel like your coffee is strong enough, or you feel like you don't want it to be as like thick muddy, and you can always change the coarseness of it to your preference.
So the coarser it is, the less muddy. The finer it is, the stronger?
Yeah. So for instance, if you're ever making cold brew at home, you want a coarser kind of cut for it, because it's going to be sitting in there and it's not going to have hot water flowing through it.
Right.
So it's easier to
really get saturated.
To really get it.
Yeah.
I find that a lot of people don't like at-home coffee just because it's not ground to like their preference. A lot of people will go and just think, oh, I'm going to, just use whatever. And it might be a metal filter, A lot of people at home use paper filters. A metal filter is not going to be the same as paper. If you're going to get it ground, usually the places that really take coffee for real, they'll have a grinder that is usually set from 1 to 8. 1 being French press, which is what cold brew is ground. And then there's a 3, which is for someone that is going to maybe make their grounds into K-cups. It's usually around a 3. Okay. A paper filter is right in the middle. It's going to be about a 4.5 or 5. I know it doesn't seem in the middle, but when it comes to the gauges, it's kind of in the middle for a good like home ground coffee. And then if you like something that's really finely ground, it would be like if you're doing pour overs at home. So that would be like at the bottom, the setting. Also, I have a tip for people that don't want as much bitterness in their coffee. If they like the taste but seems overwhelming, my good buddy and my brother Matthew Bird has a good technique that you can use. You just add a little small bit of salt to the coffee. It can reduce the bitterness, and you can also add a pinch of just a basic baking soda, and you would just put that in the filter with the grinds. And and you can actually, this might be a little bit extra, but you could also put a little bit of filter on top of that, just to make sure that it gets through the water and not just sits at the top, because sometimes that happens.
Sure, that's fair.
Yeah. And it's like a teeny tiny amount of soda.
Just a little
I've
bit.
seen him
Just
do
a
it.
pinch. Just a
Yeah.
dab will do you.
Like, not even pinch in baking
A
terms, I
quarter.
think, technically.
Sure.
I don't know
Quarter.
baking terms, but I like have seen him do it. We even get that small, but
Yeah.
It's magic.
Okay, I ask everyone who
That's true.
talks about coffee this question because I haven't managed to track some down myself yet. But Brooke, have you ever had egg coffee?
I have not had coffee. Can you tell me about it?
Egg coffee is made with a percolator, and you can actually make it on top of a campfire. And the trick to egg coffee is that you get all of the stuff ready in the percolator, and then you break the egg into where the grounds go. And then you put the eggshells into where the grounds go, and then you just make the coffee in the percolator like usual. I'm not a percolator person, so I don't really know that process that well. But the eggshells and also the raw egg itself sort of clarify the coffee as the water goes through. And it supposedly does a great job of getting rid of bitterness, and also it's a ancient Midwestern Scandinavian staple that was
Ancient
super.
Midwestern Scandinavian staple.
Yeah, it's a standard church coffee basement thing in a lot of places, except that because percolators are not nearly as common as they used to be, and a lot of folks have gone to those giant coffee urns in their church basement, it's not
Yeah.
actually as common as it once was. But like apparently back in the 60s, that was what you would expect in a church basement.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was going to say that I am appalled Brooke did not talk about cold brew, which is in fact the best coffee, and also because it is cold takes out some of the bitterness that way as well.
I will touch on cold brew because I do love cold brew.
Right?
But I understand that sometimes people don't have the equipment to make cold brew at home. So shout out to Amazon because they have some really cool cold brew if you want to make some toddies at home. But cold brew is absolutely delicious.
Mm-hmm.
I love cold brew because it is not like a regular coffee maker where the water runs through it and so many things get left behind. All the treasure and the deepness and the soul gets left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually steeps for it's good to do it for almost 2 days.
Yeah, I've done it, but like my cold brew would always say like 12 to 24 hours, and I'd be like, okay, do not touch it until it has been at least 24 hours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, like, the richness that cold brew brings to the table is why I love coffee.
Yeah.
Because I am a room temperature, no ice, I don't want a hot kind of coffee drinker. And I feel like cold brew, you don't need no ice. You don't need nothing in there. It's just throw some creamer. It's wonderful. But just remember that follow directions. And if you're going to make cold brew at home, make sure that you get them to grind it coarse for you. Because one thing about getting too, small of a, grind, it is not going to give you the fullness that you're looking for with cold brew. It's going to be muddy. And muddiness and soulfulness, they're different when it comes to coffee.
It's true. And I think there are like a lot of like at-home hacks for like how to cold brew without the cold brew, like how to do it without, because like the one we have is a cold brew thing that I got from parishioners in my first call,
awesome.
and has like a fancy filter and it has a plug and all of that stuff. But they also on the website have instructions on like if you don't want to use the really thick fancy filter that you have to like use imses, you can do it with like a triple layered coffee filter or like other things that like, so there are ways to hack it if you cannot for any or whatever buy the like cold brew.
Yeah.
So those are like different ways of making coffee. But what about different coffee drinks like lattes and cappuccinos and blended and
Macchiatos and
the Starbucks macchiatos and the not Starbucks real opinion macchiatos, sorts of different options. Tell us some about
and the
different
London fog
coffee
versus the double
drinks.
white and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. So if you like the taste of coffee, but it's overwhelming to you, you're someone that likes a lot of creamer in your coffee, but you're going to Starbucks with your friends and you're like, oh, I'm going to try something different today. Instead of getting a cup of coffee, a latte would be great. I feel like a latte is like the starter of the coffees for me because
That is accurate.
it is most like a coffee you would make for yourself, I feel. Even though, your coffee you would make at home is probably like 12 to 16 ounces, and 10 of those ounces is the actual coffee, and then the rest is creamer. Literally.
You're telling on yourself, Brooke.
I know. That's why I'm explaining. So yes, I will say that's how I started drinking coffee, because I started with a latte because I am a more creamer than coffee kind of girl. And I was just like,
so
just trying to
what
figure this
is a latte? Is it just coffee? It's espresso, right?
out. Yeah.
Espresso
So
and
steamed
cream?
milk.
Steamed. Okay.
Yeah. So a latte is, so you can usually pick the flavor. So my go-to was just a caramel latte. So it'd be some caramel syrup and like, so a regular, for like a 16 ounce, anywhere you go, like a regular latte usually comes in like 12 to 16 ounces. So in a latte, you would have 2 shots of espresso. A latte would be like 150 milligrams. So that would be 2 shots, and then it would be fill the rest of the top with milk, steamed milk, and you have your preference of foam or no foam. A lot of places, including Starbucks, give you a lot of milk alternatives in case you have an allergy. And I really feel like if you want to step, into like a fancy drink from your just cup of joe at home, a latte is a good place to start. So if you like the taste of coffee and you want to get your intake of the caffeine right off the bat, you want to have immediate, happiness when you taste that caffeine. Because some people, they have issues finishing their coffees. This is like a thing. A macchiato is great. A macchiato is just like a latte, but upside down. So you would have a flavor and steamed milk on the bottom, and the shots would be poured into the cup, so the caffeine is on top. People that go to Starbucks, one of the biggest drinks that Starbucks has on the menu is a caramel macchiato. And it's because,
which, if you're like talking to the like fancy Italians or whatever, they will like deride because it's not an actual real macchiato with all espresso and a dollop of cream.
Yeah, there's
but I love caramel macchiatos.
Italian macchiato.
Yeah. But also, Brooke, tell me, what flavor syrup does Starbucks use for a caramel macchiato?
Oh, you're asking me this
because I've
heard that Starbucks uses vanilla syrup.
Right.
And the caramel aspect is literally just drizzle on top.
Rude.
There's no caramel in the cup.
Yeah. If I ever go and get a caramel macchiato, I will say specifically no vanilla, instead use caramel.
I wonder if vanilla syrup is cheaper?
I mean,
it's not that it's cheaper. It's just, I feel like vanilla was one of their first pumps that they had for flavor. And I feel like the caramel macchiato was one of their first ones that they like came up with. Sure. And a lot of things I've heard Starbucks does is they like to use a lot of the same products to cultivate a new drink, if you will. We're going to do air quotes by new drink.
Don't have to buy new stuff in order to make new drinks.
Yes. Yeah. And so I feel like when they started making caramel macchiatos, now don't quote me because I don't really know, but I feel like they didn't have the caramel pump yet. They might have had drizzle,
but not the
not caramel flavor. Yeah.
Huh.
Caramel, classic, and vanilla are like their, that was their first like syrups that like stayed, that stuck. And I feel like they were just trying to like steer people away from I feel like they were steering away from like other coffee places, and they were just like, what can I do to like up the macchiato that people are already drinking? What can I do to like snazz it up and just put some drizzle on it? But yeah. Secret, a caramel macchiato is just a vanilla latte with shots on top.
I did not know that. Okay, but then what's a cappuccino? How's a cappuccino different from a latte?
I love making cappuccinos. So a cappuccino is a lot like a latte. The only difference is the preparation of the milk. So when making a latte, you want to make the milk like frothy to the taste, but not make it a consistent foam, like.
You don't want it to like float on top.
Yeah, you don't want it to like overtake the latte. But a cappuccino is like a latte with half the milk and the rest of the cup is just foam, and it's just
Ooh.
aerated like milk.
Huh.
It actually, I find it interesting that some of our customers that are European and are traveling, they don't drink lattes. They drink cappuccinos because a latte is too much milk. They really just want enough milk to blend with the espresso. It's kind of like a cappuccino, in like, if you look at the cup, if you could like cut the cup open without everything falling out, a cappuccino would literally just be like, I'm gonna say 3 inches of actual liquid, and the rest is foam. And people that drink cappuccinos, they do not want a lot of the liquid. They are just there for the foam.
Yeah.
So that's like really important. One of the testers that I do when I check cappuccinos when I'm serving them is if I hold it and it feels like it's half empty, because that's what it has to feel like.
Interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, it's funny.
I love it.
Because I'm just like, you're paying for, but do you, boo boo? It's good.
And while we're talking about milk, do you have thoughts on milk alternatives for those of us who are lactose intolerant?
I do. My fiance is lactose intolerant, and I find that she really enjoys oat milk. Oat milk is kind of expensive, but I feel like it has a really good flavor for coffee. I'm going to say that in darker roasts, it does not cut the bitterness that a lot of people are looking for, but in lighter and medium roasts, oat milk is delightful. Also, not just for people that are lactose intolerant, but people maybe that are trying to watch their carb intake, maybe because of health reasons. Half and half is a great alternative because it doesn't have as much fat as regular. It doesn't have as much fat or carbs as regular milk. And I feel like it's a great alternative. So is heavy whipping cream. A lot of people come in about like have health issues, and heavy whipping cream is a good alternative for like milk.
Because a little bit of it goes a long way.
Yeah.
And it's got to have a high fat content. And so that's good for that. Okay.
I also want to give a shout out to almond milk. I never thought that I would enjoy almond milk because I just didn't understand the nut milks. Like, how are they making milk out of nuts? Like, I was just really confused about it. But I really think that it's a great alternative for people that are lactose intolerant because it's a little bit thicker than regular milk, and it gives it a more creamier, silky vibe, almond milk. And I didn't touch on shaken espressos, but people who like cold iced lattes and shaken espressos, a good alternative to get that half and half feeling is almond milk.
Yeah, I've personally found that I prefer almond milk, the unsweetened kind. The sweet kind is just a lot.
Yeah,
But
a lot of people say that.
Yeah, I will often go for that. Although, to be honest, I am also the lactose intolerant that can deal with just a little bit of dairy each day, and so I usually can handle either one serving of cheese or just regular creamer in my coffee if I need creamer that day. So I will also go that direction.
Yeah. I think we use at home just a non-dairy flavored creamer.
Yeah.
We also have like the lactose-free milk.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have, and maybe this is something that like Kay and I also can answer after you, but any favorite or surprising combinations or beverages in terms of like coffee beverages?
So this is not something I personally like, but there is a trend going around adding some lemonade in cold brew.
Oh, I have not heard that one. Okay.
Yeah, it's a thing. I work at a coffee house that's near a college campus. So a lot of the college students like to come in with TikTok drinks. And I remember one day I was at the register and a young lady came up and said, "Can I get a venti cold brew with lemonade?" And I was just blown because I was just like, "You want me to put lemonade in the cold brew like together, or do you want to like on the side and you can just sip them both, you know?" as you're walking down
Please
the
explain
sidewalk.
this
I
to
mean,
me.
there's
Yeah.
no judgment, but as a avid cold brew drinker, I was offended because I'm just like, I don't know what you're doing right now, but people love it. It is a summer like thing that people find it refreshing, and people are
Now I'm
loving it.
curious.
Also, they are getting like just a lemonade and putting espresso shots on top of it, just smashing it. It's the most interesting thing I've ever seen. Somebody told me that it tastes like a Long Island iced tea, and I said that don't taste like no Long Island iced tea. I mean, it did look like it, but it did not. I know it did not taste like that.
Yeah, that.
Also, I didn't touch on another alternative for caffeine, but this makes me think about that because again, it was paired again with lemonade. Matcha. Matcha is a green tea blend that some places like Starbucks, they have a powdered form that usually gets shaken with like milk, but they're out here shaking it with lemonade, and it's called a matcha lemonade.
I could see that actually.
And
that one makes more sense to me than a cold brew lemonade.
Does it?
I don't really like green tea very much, so I feel like it would sweeten it up a little for me.
So for me, it looks like swamp water, so I immediately start like down the bayou every time because I'm just like, this does not look
the start of a kale
good.
smoothie. Yeah.
Listen. But people love it, and people say it gives you a boost. And I have to say that in the coffee shop that I work at, that matcha is a huge popular drink to start your morning. So this goes back to our conversation about people that might not be able to drink coffee. If you, like we were saying, if you like herbal teas, a matcha would be a great alternative for you. You can get it, like I said, you can get it with lemonade or you can get it with oat milk, regular milk. It's really, really good with a little bit of oat milk and some brown sugar if you like that type of thing. It's great.
My biggest surprise combination that I didn't expect was raspberry white mocha. Definitely. I did not expect raspberry to go well with coffee, and it does.
Oh, yeah. I've had a raspberry white mocha, and that was a little sweet for me, but I do like a raspberry milk chocolate mocha. That is usually a little deeper. My usual go-tos for flavors are either hazelnut or raspberry.
I don't like...
Oh, I have a fun fact.
Okay.
I brought up hazelnut. So fun fact, if you go to a coffee shop, for instance, Starbucks, and you go up to the counter and you're like, can I get a French vanilla latte or a French vanilla cappuccino? Fun fact that French vanilla is made with vanilla and hazelnut.
I knew there was something to that. Okay.
Yep. It is not just straight up vanilla. It actually has a nuttier aspect for it.
French vanilla.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Make sure you don't say French vanilla if they have if it's like a French vanilla or just like a toasted vanilla option for a latte. Go with the toasted vanilla, because if you're not a hazelnut person, then let's stay clear from that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the rest of us get to have the Nutella that Emily doesn't want.
So, I like Nutella.
I just
don't like hazelnut
okay,
flavors.
But that is hazelnut.
It doesn't taste like hazelnut. It tastes like chocolate.
Oh, is this like how coffee smells? The way that coffee smells is the way that mocha ice cream tastes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Huh.
Have you not noticed that? Because I loved mocha ice cream as a child, but then someone actually gave me coffee to taste, and oh man, the face I made. I had to get used to coffee. Of course, to be fair, my mother makes coffee that you can both stand up a spoon in, and then the coffee will start eating away at the spoon.
But my favorite coffee drink, told you my surprise coffee, like the surprising combination. My favorite coffee drink is one that Brooke and I made in a TikTok series that we do called Sabbath Sips. And I named it the Third Sacrament because it was both alcohol and coffee, which both of those, depending on who you talk to, are joked about as being third sacraments in Lutheran tradition. It had cold brew in it, and it was delightful. And we can link to that for folks who are interested. That's my favorite way of having coffee now. Not that I do very often.
Are we saying our favorite coffees?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, like favorite or surprising, you know.
Oh, okay. So my favorite coffee is a shaken espresso with white chocolate mocha with brown sugar,
Ooh.
and I love vanilla sweet foam on top of it.
You say shaken. Do you have to have a martini shaker for those, or?
So yes and no. So the thing that's very important about shaken espresso shots is that you have to remember to put ice in it.
Okay.
Because a lot of people don't realize that, like, when you put hot coffee inside something and you start shaking it, it's
Oh
gonna pop off.
yeah.
So I really like a lot of ice in the shaker to cool off the shots, but I don't like the ice actually in it. So I like to just hold back the ice and pour the chilled shots in. I prefer half and half. I feel like it's a really good creamy thing. And with the shaker, it's very important to put the flavor in. If you're going to use a shaker at home, put the flavor in with the espresso shots. Let those get all cold in there too before you add the milk to it. Don't shake with milk because that takes away from the flavor a little bit, but highly recommend making shaken espressos.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a favorite. Like I said, I vary between raspberry and hazelnut and occasionally try other things, but I'm usually a getting the same kind of thing person. But the weirdest coffee thing that I heard about recently was, and I think it was over the summer, a coffee shop that, does not entirely have to be named if we don't want to, was trying to popularize putting olive oil in their coffee drinks. And oh my goodness, that
Oh.
sounded like such a terrible idea.
It is.
And
Yeah.
It's a very
yeah,
terrible
that
idea.
gracious.
There was also like a
Ooh.
trend with like butter coffee at one.
Okay, see, I'll try adding butter to almost anything. That's fair. But
I mean,
I don't
yes, but
necessarily know that that's a great idea, but when in doubt, adding butter, that's not a terrible concept.
yeah,
But
but the olive oil
olive oil?
was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a PSA about adding olive oil to your coffee is that make sure that you have a restroom accessible
Yeah, I've
because
heard that rumor too.
Yeah.
It
you
will mess
gotta.
with your digestive system. Yeah.
Yes, it will, and it's gonna come quick because the
Uh-huh.
oil gets it going.
Wow.
So PSA,
Don't
Much
drink that right before a
appreciated.
job interview. I've heard
no,
that
Yeah,
story a couple of
because
times. Yeah.
yeah,
Ooh, yeah.
like don't go to jury duty. That
Anything else you want to share with us about coffee?
um.
Or your favorite coffee, your favorite coffee drinker in
Oh yeah.
history, or anything like that?
So, I have a fun fact about coffee that I thought was very interesting. When I was looking up fun facts about coffee, because I was just like, I'm a barista, so like I know all these great tips and fun facts about coffee, but I wonder who liked coffee in history. So I googled famous people who liked coffee. So I found out that Martin Luther King Jr. loved coffee. And he would really give praise and acknowledgement for coffee farmers when he would do speeches. And he just wanted to make people aware of their sacrifice and the hard work that they do to keep Americans going every single day. And I thought that that was very honorable. I mean, we already know how honorable he was as a person, but I didn't know that he was fighting for farmers too, which made
Yeah.
me very excited that his love and support of the human race was also, spread to farmers that he didn't even know, that he had never met, that he, didn't know anything about, but he wanted us to know and to be aware of how much they do for us.
Mm-hmm.
Because without these farmers, our days would not be great. And just like people that don't drink coffee, that drink tea, those people who have to go out and pick the tea every day, that's a huge sacrifice because they have to be outside all day. And I feel like it's an awesome thing to remember the people that, provide things that we use every single day, like coffee. And
Yeah.
so shout out to the coffee farmers and their
Absolutely.
families.
Are you curious about how the Twilight Saga is influenced by Mormon theology?
Or why so many vampires are queer coded?
Have you sat up at night pondering if the documentary Jesus Camp counts as a horror film?
Or have you ever wondered which slasher icon is which member of the Trinity?
Do you ever get into debates about whether the movies Casper, Ghost, and Candyman can be part of the Ghostbusters expanded universe?
Have you watched most of the Nightmare on Elm Street series before the age of 10?
What? Do I, who does that?
Okay, maybe that one's just me. But if you answered yes to any of the other questions, then we've got the podcast for you.
And if
I
you answered yes to Pace's question.
that too. I'm Pace, and I am the super nerdy horror person who's been a horror fan since well before the age when it was appropriate to watch these movies.
And I'm Pastor Emily, and I am the inevitable queer coding somewhere in every horror movie. And we are the hosts of Horror Nerds at Church, a ridiculously queer podcast hosted by two non-binary trans nerds.
Each season, we follow a horror franchise and a host of other horror and horror adjacent movies to talk about how they connect to queerness, religion, and theology.
We feature bona fide scary movies like Halloween, The Witch, Candyman, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Suspiria.
We also have non-scary movies or low-stake horror movies like Ghostbusters, The Addams Family, Doctor Strange, and Hocus Pocus.
Our upcoming season, we are covering a galaxy far, far away by looking at the Star Wars and Alien franchises from queer, religious, and horror points of view.
So whether you're a lifelong horror master like me,
Or a horror Padawan like me,
we have a place for you at Horror Nerds at Church.
find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you catch your podcasts.
So, our first reading for this episode is from Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 31 through 34. Jeremiah shares that God will make a new covenant with God's people that will be written on their hearts and grounded in forgiveness.
So one of that I noticed in this passage is the idea of relational knowledge, of like knowledge about another person or a situation on being in relation with it. And so my favorite example of that is in Doctor, I think particularly with the Capaldi doctor and Clara, his companion. Clara like gets to know him so there's because of the relationship that she has had with him and the previous doctor, that like really be relationship that they get to.
Oh, yeah. And as we jump into the verses, in verse 31, we read, "The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah." And I don't know, maybe it's just this time of year, but somehow this always strongly reminds me of the feeling of starting a new school year. It's a new chance to start over, a new start to doing the studying right this year for once, as an ADHD kid, or a new beginning with new roommates if you're at boarding school or college. And sometimes you just need to start fresh. Just ask Elle Woods from Legally Blonde.
It's true.
You never know
She
what it-
needed
where
a
it'll
fresh
lead.
start.
Yeah.
I was looking at verse 32, particularly the like everything except for the last phrase, particularly. And we read, "It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand, bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke." And then it says, "Though I was their husband." But what it really sounds like is not a husband to me, but like holding a toddler's hand when they're like first learning to walk. And they definitely break that covenant. They break that handle plenty of times. But I was particularly reminded of this because yesterday, from when we were recording, Facebook memory came up of the first time I went apple picking with my favorite now 5-year-old. And it was the first time, like she had only ever been fed apple slices. And so it was the first time that she like had an apple and was like biting into it by herself and herself. And I know her like chubby cheek, freaking adorable, but also like I remember walking with her and like sometimes carrying, sometimes holding hands, sometimes breaking that handle.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say that this reminds me of me. Like when I was a little kid, I didn't want anyone to hold my hand. I just wanted to run and just gallivant. So I understand the breaking of that and just being free.
Yeah.
Like,
I was gonna picture you as like a little kid, just like
always
running,
Always.
not with a hand.
No. And my grandmother calling me, stop running. And I'm just like, just living my life.
Living your best kid life.
Absolutely.
Our next reading is Romans chapter 3, verse 9. Paul reminds us that humanity cannot bring ourselves into right relation with God, but only God can make us right through faith. And there's this sense in the way that Paul is talking about law that harkens back to our most recent episode before this on Pharisees and Sadducees and how Pharisees approach the law, and that, Paul is a Pharisee. But this particularly was like the way that the law is meant to guide and to be a way of guidance. And that reminded me of a series on TikTok called Roll for Puppet that I love. And they let dice create the puppets. And one of the character personality that you can roll is lawful. And for them, it is about caring for and protecting the community, which gets a little bit into other story that I don't particularly appreciate, but they don't protect it. But I like that the law is there. The lawfulness is guidance towards care for a
And also, part of that means that lawful characters are not boring by default. They have lots of interesting stories to tell. Just being lawful does not automatically mean that you're boring.
Absolutely.
Keep in mind that Captain America is lawful.
Absolutely.
So,
Kay, that's exactly who I was thinking. Because Captain America's number one thing is to make sure that he was doing things lawful and the right way. And I love Captain because he really wanted to help people, but he also wanted to do it responsibly. And we all know that all the Avengers didn't do stuff responsibly.
Yeah, Tony Stark
as soon as
definitely
Hulk
not
came
lawful.
out, I was like, here we go. The Hulk is now in the party.
That is chaotic for sure. Yeah,
definitely.
And then as we jump into the verses, in verse 19, we read, "Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced, and the whole world may be held accountable to God." And this verse is comparing legal proceedings to God's process. And because we've been doing this for a while, of course, my automatic thought is, what is the wackiest concept of legal proceedings that God could possibly be compared to? And so now I'm wondering what God's version of Judge Judy would be like. I mean,
Definitely.
yes, okay, so God is generous and loving, but also that doesn't mean we're going to stop being full of melodrama, humanity. We have plenty of melodrama. And
Absolutely.
it's just way too much a part of who we are to let go of. And so I have to imagine that at some point even God will get a little exhausted with the melodrama, because actually that happens several times in Scripture. And so the God's version of Judge Judy would be so much fun, as long as you're not the one in the witness box,
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, but now I'm thinking about Judge Judy being the judge for any of the trials for Trump.
Oh, gosh.
You cannot tell me that would not be perfect.
Oh, it would be great.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be allowed to talk the whole time, which would be great.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
I did suggest at one point that after Elizabeth Warren got knocked out of the last presidential election, that she should therefore be made the moderator of all future debates. No one took me up on it, but it would have been very fun.
Amazing. She would be phenomenal at that. Yeah. I was looking at verse 27, where in verse 27 it reads, "Then what becomes of boasting? It is excluded. By what law? By that of works? No, but by the law of faith." And I just find it ironic that the consummate boaster, that is Paul, is now excluding boasting. And I was like, that's as if Merry and Pippin, when they were drinking the water in, I think it was Fangorn Forest, and they start to get taller because of the water, had all of a sudden, stopped trying to compare who was taller. And maybe then they'd have realized that the trees were waking up and it wasn't exactly for them in that period by themselves. But yeah, the boast of I'm taller, I'm taller, I'm taller, and then your own detriment. And maybe that's what happened. Paul realized the thing he was doing was detriment.
Yeah. So that reminds me of Narnia. Do you remember Narnia when, what's the youngest? Not the youngest, but the
Edward,
who Edward was the younger boy. He wanted to be like his brother, right? Yeah. And he was just like, oh, I'm going to go off by myself and I'm going to do this. And then he ends up with the white witch in there, and he was like, oh, this is going to be great. She's giving us Turkish delight and it's wonderful. And then he ended up being bait. So that's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
Look what boasting got you.
Oh,
Yeah.
now I want the version of Narnia where instead of giving him Turkish delight, she gave him Turkish coffee. And then he was just bouncing off the walls for the next 8 hours.
Yeah, she would have dropped him back off. She would be like, nope. Tell me where your siblings are. I'm going to drop you back off because you're doing too much.
Yeah, that probably would have backfired on her immediately. Yep. I love it.
And our gospel reading for this episode is John chapter 8, verses 31 through 36. Jesus calls his followers to abide by his teachings, emphasizing that the truth will set them free from sin.
One of the themes passage is freedom. What a surprise. It's in the summary. But this, the way that we're looking at freedom in this passage, I think it feels less like an absolute freedom kind of sense and more like the freedom of Firefly, or even the freedom that River Tan finally gets at the end of the movie Serenity, where it's freedom to an extent, but that does not guarantee that it is safe or easy. It is still difficult. To still have to sometimes evade law enforcement.
Yeah.
Or other.
I guess I've never thought of freedom as being safe or easy.
Yeah, it's true. But I think culturally in this country, that's how we talk about it a lot.
Often, yeah. And then in verse 32 we read, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." And to be fair, sometimes the truth is going to, just suck. And so it's important for us to remember that even if Darth Vader is your dad, Luke, that doesn't mean that you can't be a wonderful and delightful person yourself. It might be a little hard to concentrate on that at first when you first learn who your dad is. That's fair. Having the freak out is perfectly valid. But knowing that an existing relationship exists is probably helpful in the long run, and it certainly turned out to be helpful to Luke's dad in Star Wars. So.
It's true. It, kind of saved his life.
Yeah.
I was looking at verse 33, and the Jesus followers answer him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" And every time this comes up, because of these readings we get every Reformation Day, every time I'm like, wow, the revisionist history here. It's like the story in Encanto about the family. The same origins, the very beginning of the story. We are descendants of Abraham. Our mother survived with these triplets from this terrible thing. But the journey since, the path just is not the historical path. The followers of Jesus are we've never been slave to anyone. Never mind that they were slaves in Egypt. And the family in Encanto is and since then, we have been having this wonderful time. And Bruno? What Bruno? Who Bruno? Nobody talks about Bruno. No. Yeah. Don't do revisionist history. We've got enough problems with that happening everywhere in this country already.
This is random, but we're talking about revision history. Something that popped in my head is Hercules, the Disney movie.
Oh, I've never seen it.
Listen, that's one of my favorite Disney movies. But when you get older and you learn more about Greek mythology, you realize that is not the way it happened.
That's every Disney movie.
And I was just hold up. So that was the revision in my head I was thinking of, because I'm just y'all ain't telling the right story, because Hera would have had nothing to do with Hercules. That was not his mom. They were not in this big old happy family. That is not what happened. But yeah. So yeah.
That's true. And now for our most energized segment. Let's make a Muppets musical. So this is the segment where we cast any of the readings as a Muppets musical. You can cast a token human, a Muppet. We define Muppet very, very loosely, so it could be anything. Brooke, do you have a thought, or do you want somebody else to go first?
Somebody else can first, because I'd come up with a good one.
All right. Kay, do you have one?
Well, this is less tied to our readings than it is to our deep dive, but it did occur to me look, back in the day, I enjoyed the TV show Friends. I was not one of those, obsessed people, but it was fun. often, except for, when Ross Geller was being Ross Geller, but that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, Ross
But
was the
of the
worst.
characters on Friends, you know who actually would be the best at hanging out with Muppets? Gunther, the barista.
Oh.
Wouldn't he mix so well with the Muppets? He is so gentle and kind and patient. And also, I think he would mix so well with the Muppets, whereas several of the other characters in Friends really wouldn't. Like, let me tell you, honestly, both Phoebe and Joey would have a good time, but,
Yeah.
Gunther is definitely the best option for if you have to have a character from Friends join the Muppets. And also, there would be coffee, and then the Muppets would be even more excited. So,
yeah.
I just want to give a RIP to him, because the person that played him, James Michael Tyler, he passed away in 2001. So shout out to
gracious.
Gunther.
Wait, in 2001?
Sorry, 2021. Just kidding.
Okay, yes.
20 years off, my bad,
Okay.
but yeah.
I did not know that. That's a shame.
I didn't
So
know that.
RIP, Gunther.
Yeah.
During this musical today.
Emily, did you have thoughts about the Muppets?
That's a good question. I feel like, in some respect, I want to cast the Yip Yip as the followers of Jesus.
Okay, sure.
Because there's a thought behind this. Because Jesus is like, here's this thing. And they're like, nope, 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 nope. And then he's like, what will be free? And they're like, yep, 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 yep. So they're totally off, but they are like going at it with gusto. And then,
oh, sure.
Course correction.
And then in the background, Gunther gives them coffee, and all of the nope, nope, nopes and yep, yep, yeps get even faster.
Yes. Exactly. I love it.
We're giving them macchiatos.
Yeah.
I am perplexed with this. I'm unsure about my Muppets character I would pick.
It doesn't have to be an actual Muppet.
And to be fair, usually when we do this, at least one of our readings is like a narrative story, and we didn't get one of those this time, which is a little more difficult. So
yeah. So if you want to pick a different story from the Bible, perhaps to cast, that also works totally fine. If you have a favorite story
which
from
Muppet
the Bible,
do you think would want to hang out with Martin Luther on Reformation Day?
Yeah,
but I think pasted that one.
Sip coffee with MLK.
Sure.
So if I was picking my Muppet to sip, it would definitely be Kermit. Definitely not. Miss Piggy is not coming, but sorry, it's coffee date with just Kermit the Frog. And I picked Kermit because I believe that Kermit always has something positive to say despite current circumstances. I feel like he has a positive vibe that is sometimes necessary in situations, and maybe he could just be, the bright side of situations.
Yeah. Not
comic relief, but someone that might make some of the heavier discussions a little bit lighter.
He's good at cheering people up. Yeah.
Definitely.
And also when he gets super energized, like for example when he's caffeinated, the way his movement changes so that it looks like his limbs are actually rubber bands is just so joyful. There's so much happiness to that.
It's true.
Definitely.
It's true.
So, Brooke, any other thoughts on life, the universe, and everything?
Just thoughts about life. I feel like people, whoever is listening to this, I just want you to remember that when you think that you can't go any further or that an obstacle is too hard, I always want you to remember that you are not alone, and that prayer and just talking to friends and family can be helpful. Always remember that there are people in your corner, and you might not think that they are, but call someone. Tell someone you love them today. That's my point of view. Call someone. Tell someone that you love them, text them, email them. Just tell someone you love them today.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic.
I really appreciate you having me. This was a blast.
And thank you, dear listener, for joining us. Our theme music was by Rachel Meyer-Laughlin, and Muppets music was by Brenda Boss. Catch us next time when we'll discuss nerdery connection to the scripture readings for All Saints Day. This podcast has been produced by us, Emily Ewing and Kay Roloff. For more fun, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and now Blue Sky at Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut guest episodes and interviews, live Q&As, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. It's definitely cheaper than a venti macchiato.
It is so much cheaper. Also, let us know on Blue Sky, Facebook, or Twitter who you would cast for Let's Make a Muppets musical for this episode.
As the ancient Christians said,
Pax vobiscum.